This video is just a short extract from the entire course. If you wish to see all of the videos from this series at higher quality and in far larger screen size, head over to ifskills.com.
Let's get Photoshop's HTML file open, and as I mentioned, I'll give you a tour through this file and show you exactly how it's been set up automatically by Photoshop. So here in Dreamweaver, you could choose File Open, and you could go and find that weblayout.html file that Photoshop generated, or you could simply go and find it inside the Files panel. The Files panel makes it nice and handy. So inside the Files panel, at least for myself, I have to scroll all the way down towards the bottom, and there's weblayout.html. Go ahead and double-click on that fella, and voila, there's our layout. There's our Photoshop file. So there's a bunch of things that I want to show you here. First of all, you might want to kind of scroll through and maybe click around a little bit, see what we have. Essentially what we have is, well, a ton of images. Again, every slice, whether it was a layer-based slice or a user-defined slice or even an auto slice, is now defined as a graphic, as an image. Even the white space between objects, those are tiny, thin white graphics. If you can try and get in there and select them anyway, they are definitely in there. There we go. Now, the other thing that I want to mention is that everything is contained inside what's referred to as div elements or div objects. And I'm not sure how much you know about this stuff, but essentially the bottom line is that div elements or div objects are essentially layout containers. That's how I think of them. Think of them as layout boxes. So let me show you something here. I've grabbed my slideshow here right off the bat. And then down on your status bar, down in the bottom left corner, we have what's referred to as the tag selector. So this guy tells me what I've selected and where I am currently inside my code. So for instance, I'm going to read this backwards. It says I have an image selected, and that image resides inside a div, which is under the control of a rule there, it looks like, called web layout. That's interesting. We'll have to investigate that, which is inside another div called table1, which is inside the body of the document. Okay, that's how that works. So you might want to click around a little bit and you can kind of see what's what. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is the CSS styles panel over on the right-hand side. So go ahead and click on CSS styles over on the right. At the top of the CSS styles panel, click on all, and give me a second here. I'm just going to pull this divider down a little bit. Notice what we have here. Notice all of our rules, once again, are named after the slices that you and I had set up back in Photoshop. So, for instance, number sign, BUT-home, Y karate, meet your sensei, FAQ. I saw a slideshow there somewhere. There he is right there. And what else? There's my center box, right? Center box 1, 2, and 3, and so on and so on. So once again, those slice names not only are going to control the name of the graphic when it gets exported from Photoshop, but it also controls the name of the CSS rule that controls that object. And by the way, the number sign that precedes each of these rule names indicates that this particular rule is an ID selector. We have a couple of different kinds of rules that we can use inside CSS. These guys are called IDs, and you might remember that from when we were exporting from Photoshop. We said we wanted to use ID references. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that's all good. Now the next thing that I want to show you, and this is the fun part, is I want to show you the code. I want to show you the actual code that Photoshop has written. How do you feel about code? Are you okay looking at code and digging around and maybe even making changes in code? If not, it's really nothing to be too terrified about. Everybody always makes it out to be a big deal. It's actually really, really easy. So way up towards the top left corner, I'm going to go ahead and activate Dreamweaver's code view. Go ahead and click on code there. And here we go. Here's the code that Photoshop has written for us. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in there. Now, as a designer, this is huge because, once again, I could have done this all by hand. I could have rebuilt what we created inside Photoshop by hand here over in Dreamweaver. But I got Photoshop to do all the work for me. So even though the code might not be exactly what I want, at least it's a really, really good starting point. So if you know your code, once again, you might want to scroll through and take a look at what we have here. let me fill you in here just in case you're not too comfortable with this, or maybe you're just kind of getting started with code. Essentially, what we have is what's referred to as an internal style sheet. And what that means is all of our CSS rules or all of our CSS styles, that's an interchangeable term, by the way, style and rule, they all appear at the very top of my document. So if you scroll all the way up to the top of your file, you'll notice we have style type equals text/CSS, and then we have all of the rules. Now, all the rules that we see here correspond with all the rules that we see over inside the CSS styles panel. As a matter of fact, when I select BUT home, for instance, that rule selects itself over inside the styles panel. And inside the styles panel, in the bottom half of the styles panel at least, I can see all of the properties that are set for the selected rule, and I can also see all the properties inside code views. So, for example, the home button is exactly 56 pixels in width. So this is all appearing at the top of the HTML file. It's referred to as an internal style sheet as opposed to an external style sheet. Let me scroll down here because eventually, once I get through all this stuff, we'll wind up into the body of our document. And the body of the document, by the way, is what we see inside design view. So go ahead and click on design. And the body is all of the page content, if you will, all the stuff that's actually going to show up inside our browser. So that's all appearing inside the body. And as you can see inside the body, everything is being defined inside, again, what are referred to as div objects or div elements. And just for those that have never, ever done this before, here's the super fast crash course. This is not an HTML training series. This is not a CSS training series. But here's the down and dirty. I have a div object which opens. That div object has, let me use header for this actually. The div object opens, and then the div has an ID applied to it called header. That's this guy over here, or at the very top of my HTML file. Then I have some content like a graphic, and then that div object closes or ends, and then another one opens and the process repeats. That div has a different ID applied to it, BUT home, and so on, all the way through my document. Okay, so it's basically a series of layout containers that contain graphics at this point anyway. So I hope that makes sense. Super fast crash course there in terms of how it all fits together. I hope that's working for you. So you may want to spend a little bit of time getting comfortable with this file, touring through and seeing what we have. And when you're ready, let's move on to the next step in our web workflow.